And so what we want to do is, in a scientifically rigorous way, gather data, information, that data, to show that there's actually a problem. We know there's a problem, but we need data.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of Connecting ALS. I'm your host, Mike Stevenson of the ALS Association, and I'm grateful to be back with you for our first episode of 2020. It sounds strange to say. I was mentioning to producer Garrett the other day that 2020 just seems like a very futuristic year, something out of a sci-fi novel, but here we are, and we're looking forward to addressing what we hope are meaningful and relevant topics with you in the months ahead. If you're new to the show, be sure to track us down on your favorite podcast service so you can subscribe or visit connectingals.org and use one of the handy links there. All right, let's get into it. We'd hoped to start the new year with a big topic and an influential ALS mind, and we're extremely lucky to secure some time with the ALS Association's Senior Director of Mission Strategy, Dr. Jill Yersak. Dr. Yersak has been involved with ALS research for much of her career, and was gracious enough to share her insight into some of the latest and most promising treatments coming down the pipeline. She also shed light on the therapy development process and what exactly goes into the FDA's potential approval of said therapies. So I hope you're ready to take notes. We cover a lot of ground. We are honored to be joined on the phone this morning by Dr. Jill Yersak, Senior Director of Mission Strategy for the ALS Association. Good morning, Doctor. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So Dr. Yersak has long been involved with the ALS research program at the ALS Association and actually started her career in a lab. You were working on ALS research, right? Yes,
I did my postdoctoral fellowship at Brown in ALS research. I had worm models that I made sick with ALS. That's the type of worm that are in the ground. They're actually very microscopic, and so they're not as gross.
Well, sure, that makes sense. Is that kind of, those worm model research, is that common, or was that a new kind of novel thing at the time?
It is pretty common to use, they're called C. elegans, to look at basic cell pathways. My lab at Brown is really well known for that, and it was a really great project. It was a lot of fun.
Very cool, very cool. So that kind of knowledge and background in ALS research obviously lends itself well to your current role.
Yeah, I use my background all the time. My new role is as a Senior Director of Mission Strategy, and what that means is that I help with programmatic and strategy in the ALS Association National Office that spans our mission, which is care, advocacy, and research. So I do work really closely with our chief scientist, Colda Dave, who's wonderful, and our care and advocacy programs to help move those programs forward.
So many brilliant minds at the national level. We feel really fortunate to have you all in those spots guiding our research. And I've got a lot of questions for you today, so forgive me if I kind of overwhelm you, but we're excited to have you on. I want to start with a question that many of us get all the time at the chapter level, and I'm sure you probably hear it daily in your work because people are naturally curious. But how is it that the ALS Association decides which global research projects to fund? Can you kind of walk us through that process?
Sure. So what I want to first emphasize is that the research program that we run at the ALS Association is global. Right now, we fund, I think, over 110 projects in 13 countries.
Wow.
So it's not just based in the United States, it's all over the world, and we're really proud of that. And we fund the best research around the world. So there's no bias for certain people. We only fund what the best science that comes to our doors. So what we do every year is that we sit down together as an organization in our mission strategy and decide what requests for applications do we want to put out each year. And so we have requests for applications for drug development, basic science, biomarker research, all kinds of different types of research across the board. So across the ALS research pipeline. The only things that we don't fund right now are phase 3 clinical trials, and I can get into more of that later, but we fund up to phase 3 trials. And so what happens is that once we decide that, we put an RFA out, or a request for applications, to our researchers across the world. So we work with our communications team to get that out. And then researchers apply to us. They have to decide to apply to us based on what that RFA is. And we get applications in over the year. It's a rolling basis until the application RFA date ends. There's a deadline. And then what happens then is that we put together expert review panels so that our chief scientist, Dr. Dave, oversees. So we're not, as an association, deciding ourselves what to fund. It's our expert panels.
Right.
What happens is they come together in a room after they read all the applications and they score them based on, is this scientifically meaningful? Is this likely to work? How relevant is it to ALS research? And how good is the science? Do we think has real potential to move the field forward? And so they score it based on some of these criteria I just said, and then the scores are compiled by Dr. Dave, and then based on our budget we have each year, we fund a certain number of research projects for each RFA. So currently our budget is $17 million, which we're very excited about.
Yeah.
And $17 million is split between different RFAs across the research pipeline, again, from basic all the way through phase 2 clinical trials.
Okay.
So it's a lot of work for our research department to get all that information together, and then based on our budget, we can make decisions what we can fund. And then once we have that information, we take it to our board of trustees and our research committee, and they're the ones who make the final okay that these are great to fund. So literally what happens behind the scenes is that COLDIP will go into this meeting and present each project to them and say, this is what they're trying to do, and this is why we think it's fundable. And at the end, they vote and say, yes, we want to fund these projects.
It sounds like a very thorough and very logical step-by-step process. And it's nice to have that sort of behind-the-scenes look, because I think a lot of people have questions about that. Really, how do we end up, from those requests for proposals to actually funding the research?
Right. And so it is a long, thoughtful process that takes in consideration a lot of different criteria that our expert panels really read through and decide how to score these grants. And then once that's all approved by our board, then the granting process starts, the contracting starts. So we have to make sure that we put a contract out to our researchers for that grant with different rules they have to follow. And so that's a whole process in itself. And we have a really great research team comprised of Ashton and Kathy and Heather that really sit back and COLDIP to do that contracting process. And so one of the biggest part of that contracting process is that every 6 months, the researchers have to submit a progress report. What that means is that they have to show that they are hitting the milestones that they lay out in their grant proposal. And if they don't hit those milestones, we have the right to take away that money and then put it towards another project.
That's a key part of it.
Yeah, it's key because we want to make sure that the money that our donors send us is well spent on projects that are actually moving forward how they're supposed to. And if there's an issue, what happens is that the scientist will call COLDIP and he'll go through with them about how we can improve and move this forward before we have to take away funding. So they have come up with a plan.
Yeah.
So it's very, very rare we take away funding from researchers, but it can happen, and we have to have that in the contracts just to protect ourselves and our donor money. So Dr. Davi does a really great job, or COLDIP, doing this process, and we're really proud of how stringent we are. And we can see that over the years, we've been able to fund a lot of great research and led to a lot of great breakthroughs over the years. So something to be proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great to hear. Thank you for really giving us the full scope of how that process works and letting us in on what goes on, because people do, I know they have a lot of questions about that, and they want to make sure that their research dollars are being responsibly spent. And I really liked what you said about the milestone markers, because you do want to ensure that they're hitting each stage and that the research they're working on continues to be promising and will result in something promising, so that we're not just kind of throwing that money into stuff that's not going to result in progress.
Exactly. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah. So as you are well aware, there is a lot of excitement in the ALS community about some of those drug therapies that are currently in development, and also a fair bit of frustration from those who are hoping to expedite access to these treatments and find themselves running into roadblocks. There's plenty of information, as always, flying around on social media, and some of it can be misleading. So the association has been working to really get the facts out there about what's going on with these treatments and this research. And let me just start with the name that I know is on many minds because it's what's driving a lot of the conversation online. I'm talking, of course, about NurOwn. Dr. Yersak, what can you tell us about where NurOwn is at in the therapy development process?
Sure. So happy to report that NurOwn is in a phase 3 trial. And what that means is it's the largest study on all the phases of clinical trials, and it really is there to determine definitive drug efficacy, meaning does the drug do what it's designed to do? And does it help people with ALS get better in some way by some measurable outcome, right? And so they're in a phase 3 trial, which we're really happy about, and we're looking forward to see the results. Those results are not yet published because the phase 3 trial is still ongoing. And Brainstorm has said that it will not seek early approval of NurOwn and that it intends to complete its phase 3 trial. So this is a decision that Brainstorm, or the company, any company really in drug development, has to decide when to apply for approval for their drug.
And what kind of factors go into that decision typically for those drug companies?
Those types of decisions are based on their data.
Okay.
Right? So how, they need to have enough people in it and enough data to show power or significant data, meaning that they can see a statistically significant change in their data. So they're not going to do that until they have enough people enrolled and that are through the trial, or have completed the trial.
Yeah,
so
they're going to want that.
Yeah, and it takes time. And so that's a huge factor. So they have to internally decide what's the best timing for them to apply to the FDA to get their drug approved.
Right. So after that phase 3 trial comes the potential for FDA approval and access to those that are seeking the drug. I know that for NurOwn specifically, many folks out there are pointing to expanded access and right to try as options for early access. And some are even requesting an executive order from the president. But why are none of those options currently possible with NurOwn?
Sure. So I'll take a little bit of a step back just to explain each of those pathways because there's a lot of confusion around them. And I want to make sure everyone's clear what they are.
Please do.
So the first one is expanded access, and that's sometimes also known as compassionate use. And that refers to the use of an investigational drug to treat a patient with a serious disease like ALS that doesn't have any satisfactory options. So there's a bunch of different requirements in order to qualify for the expanded access. So access to an investigational drug through expanded access does require not only FDA's review and authorization, but an active involvement and cooperation of all parties, and that includes your doctor. They need to give you a prescription, and they need to give you an okay to take this investigational drug, and also includes a decision by the drug company to give you that drug.
Okay.
So what I want to emphasize here is that the drug companies are not required to provide treatments to patients under expanded access. That's up to them.
Right.
Okay. And drug companies also under expanded access also have the right to charge a patient for the use of their therapy in order to recover costs that are directly related to providing it to an individual person. And so some of these drugs have potential to be very, very expensive. So they have to decide as a company, do I want to give this drug to this person? And then if they do, they have a right to charge that person for the drug.
Okay.
Okay.
That's good to know.
So the other one is called right to try, and it has a lot of similarities, but has to have completed an FDA-approved phase 1 clinical trial. So it has to get through phase 1 trial, and it has to be actively in a clinical trial now. So it has to be in a phase 2, phase 3 trial. So the difference between right to try and expanded access is that under right to try, there's no requirement to attain a review from the FDA. So it takes the FDA out of the picture here. Okay. But still, as in the case of expanded access, drug companies are still not required to provide treatments to patients under right to try and have the ability to also charge the patient for that individual treatment. Okay.
Okay.
So again, I'm going to say it one more time, because this is the most important point, is that the company really has to make that decision. Only the company has to make that decision to make that drug, experimental drug, available to the person and supply that treatment.
Yeah, it really sounds like a lot is up to them, and I'm sure they're weighing liability and risk and different financial things and costs, and there's a ton that goes into that decision for the drug company, I'm sure.
Right. And so in the case of Brainstorm, as indicated on multiple occasions that it won't provide NurOwn to individuals via both expanded access or right to try.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really not uncommon. This happens a lot. And it's due to, like you said, these are big decisions companies have to make. And they're due to cost of giving the drug, and other factors that companies must weigh in to consider this. So it's not like a hand-waving thing. This is a very, very serious decision that a company has to make. And not many companies have expanded access programs or use right to try, not just in ALS, but in other diseases. It's pretty rare, especially in ALS. So I also want to emphasize, because, like I said, Brainstorm has not decided not to apply to the FDA to get their drug approved right now because they're still in phase 3. Mm-hmm. And so, as if you think about the executive order, asking for President Trump's direct involvement in drug approval through an executive order could raise many, many legal and timing challenges and get very complicated. And I believe this would actually not get the drug to move any faster towards the clinic, in my opinion. So I think that pathway is just something that came up online that I believe is not going to help it out at all.
Okay, that's good to know. That's
good to know. To be completely frank.
Yeah.
So, I'm here to be honest and hopefully clear about some of these points, because these are right to try and expanded access are extremely difficult to understand. And there's, like you said, Mike, there's so much misinformation out online that causes so much confusion and heartache, and it makes me so sad for this. So I want to make sure that it's clear that what these pathways are and how likely they are to actually be used.
Yeah, we really appreciate that transparency, Doctor, because we of course understand the desperation that people feel in seeking these treatments and wanting access to treatments that may potentially help themselves or their loved ones that are living with ALS. And there's just so much that goes into these legislative and financial and really, frankly, political decisions about what folks do and do not have access to throughout the drug development process. So it's good to have all that background and know kind of what goes into it. And you've mentioned the application to the FDA. Are you talking about the biologics license? Is that the final step before FDA approval?
Right. So once they finish their phase 3 trial, then they have a meeting, or I'm sure multiple meetings, to decide to then apply to the FDA for approval. And that's through a biologics license application, or BLA. And for NurOwn, it's a BLA because it's a type of stem cell product, so it's a biological product, not necessarily a drug. So what it does, it's what is defined by the FDA. It's really a request to the FDA for permission to introduce or give a drug, a biological product, into the clinic. So people then to apply for people to actually be able to take that biologic. And it states that the product is safe. And these applications, the BLA applications are really comprehensive and thorough.
Yeah, I imagine.
I mean, extremely. It has all the things, all the information about the product.
Yep.
That's been collected so far. And that includes all the preclinical work, so all the work in all the animal models. And if there was work going back to those, I'll go back to our beginning of our podcast, of the C. elegans, which is one of the smallest organisms that you can test drugs on.
Yeah.
All the way, to potentially a primate or a monkey. That's all there. All the work in cells. That's all there. All their clinical studies, meaning all the information from every phase of clinical trial. And then they include labeling information in their manufacturing plan, because they have to label it and make sure the label is accurate. And then they have to make sure, okay, we have a drug or biologic. Now, what's their plan to get it to people and manufacture it? And I'm sure there's other things I'm missing, but you can see, this is a big deal and a lot of work. I have friends in pharmaceutical companies, and when they're in this process, they are going crazy. It's a lot of work.
I believe it. I'm picturing an encyclopedia thick, document with all this information and all this data going back. I'm sure it's a ton of work to compile all of that.
It is. I love that. I love that analogy. It is like it's an encyclopedia of all the data. And so once the FDA receives that, then they can start the review process and decide then whether or not to approve the biologic. in this case, we're saying NurOwn for people with ALS, but could be for anyone. And so in the case of Brainstorm, you don't have access to Brainstorm's data. Obviously, it's confidential only to the company. But we do know, we've met and we know well the scientists who are running the trial, and we have a lot of confidence in them. They're excellent people and scientists. And so, if Brainstorm is not ready for approval, they're not ready for approval, and we respect that, meaning their application is not ready yet. And so, but what I want to say and emphasize is that when Brainstorm does apply for its BLA for NurOwn, the ALS Association will really stand ready to ask FDA for review. And so we're looking forward to that day, and I think it's going to be great news for the entire ALS community. So something to look forward to, and I'm hoping to see something relatively soon.
Thank you again, Dr. Yersak, for walking us through that. It's so helpful to have all this information about the FDA approval process, about the different options in there, and it's educating me, and I'm sure that it's educating our listeners. So I appreciate the depth you went into there.
You're welcome.
And just to clarify on how the various phases work, because I know we're talking quite a bit about that, the ALS Association typically funds trials up to and through phase 2, right? Who is it that funds phase 3 trials most often?
Right. So as an association, we've made the call to only fund up to phase 2. And the reason why is because phase 3 trials are just really expensive, costing many times more than our annual research budget. So it could cost like hundreds of millions of dollars to do a phase 3 trial. And we only have a $17 million budget this year. So just to put that in perspective, the money. So we can really if we did give money, it would only be a small level of support. And I don't think that would really change the course of the trial. But what we're really good at the association to get more impact for funding is to do projects and to fund projects that wouldn't otherwise get funding by, for example, other organizations like the National Institutes of Health or other ALS nonprofit organizations based on specific asks through our research application. So so we think about what are the gaps in funding, and we go back and think about that and then put an RFA to ask for requests for applications to fill that research gap. So we're really good at that. And the other thing we want to do that I want to emphasize is that we do work a lot with other ALS nonprofits, and that includes like ALS Funny Cure, Project ALS, Target ALS, the MDA, and others I'm missing. I'm sorry I missed you.
No,
but you know who you are. To combine our money together to fund bigger projects, right? Or like a phase 2 trial, for example, which is one of the most expensive RFAs we have. So we can pull our money together and have more bang for our buck and say, we came together with other organizations. We really believe in this project, and here's a few $1 million to move forward. And we do that pretty often, actually. And so that's something we're really excited about, and it's a really great way that we're able to collaborate with other ALS organizations. So if we're not funding phase 3 trials, what usually happens is that the pharmaceutical companies, seek investment other ways, usually through investment firms, such as like venture capital firms, or maybe even issuing more stock at their company. But I'm going to be completely honest, Mike, I'm not a financial person whatsoever. So that's all I got for you for that. But they have really great financial savvy people at their companies and that raise money for the phase 3 trials, and they're very good at it.
Yeah, they'd have to be, right? If they're seeking hundreds of millions of dollars for those phase 3 trials. Yeah, I believe that. And it's very cool to hear about the collaboration that you mentioned between some of the other ALS Focus organizations, because I think sometimes people wonder if the ALS Association or another organization is operating in a vacuum and really making these decisions on their own, and just kind of sometimes I hear the word compete, honestly, out there, that they think different ALS organizations are competing with one another in funding research, and that's really not the case. It's we all want the same thing, and that's a world without ALS. So anytime that we can come together, and whether it's in funding or just ideating some of these projects, the more we all benefit.
Right. It's really important. I can't emphasize enough the collaboration that we are able to do at the ALS Association with other organizations. It's really important because if we can pull money together, it's just so much more impactful for these companies or for these researchers around the world to get more work done in a shorter period of time. And so, in the research program is probably in my opinion, one of the best ways that we can collaborate with other organizations. And we're really proud of it. And we have really strong relationships with chief scientists across the board at all these other organizations, in addition to some of their care and advocacy people too that go along with our mission.
That's awesome. That's so great to hear. And I want to ask you about some of the other therapies, and you don't have to get into specifics about them, but I know everyone is talking about NurOwn. That's the one on everyone's mind. But in reality, there are several new treatments in the pipeline that could potentially show promise, correct?
Yeah. And NurOwn gets a lot of press, but there's so many other great new treatments out there in the pipeline that I can quickly touch on that we're really excited about and that we funded either preclinically or in a phase 1 or 2 trials. So the first thing I want to talk about is these things called antisense drugs. And this is a phase 3 trial and a phase 1 trial that are happening at Biogen. And antisense drugs are something we funded preclinically, actually very early on in the process. So the idea actually came out of University of San Diego in Dr. Don Cleveland's lab with Dr. Richard Smith. And they had this idea, and we were able to fund this very early on. I think we were the first funder of this type of technology.
Okay.
And what it does is very cool. It actually was a way to get rid of bad protein in your cells. So this bad protein can cause toxicity and cause your cells to die. And so this technology is able to get rid of that bad protein and actually prevent it to even be made in the first place. So very cool, something that I've been following for a while. And Biogen recently put out some really great phase 2 results that target SOD1. So this is a type of gene therapy. So this actually is for people who have genetic forms of ALS that inherit it from one of their parents.
Sure.
And so this SOD1 is the second most common genetic cause of ALS. And so it's in a phase 3 trial right now, which we're really excited about, and we're hoping to hear from them soon. And, if approved, it'll be the first step in ALS gene therapy. And I think that if that gets approved, and I'm very confident, I'm a very optimistic person. So I feel like if that gets approved in SOD1, it just opens the floodgates to then target all the other ALS genes. So right now, there's about 30 genes that have been discovered and validated. And so we can potentially hit down the road all those genes and help all those people have that familial ALS. And so cool. And so there's another drug in Biogen, antisense drug, targeting the C9orf72 mutation, and that's the most common genetic mutation in ALS. And so it had an even bigger population, and that's in phase 1. Okay. So we expect, and we're hoping for really great results out of Biogen. And then the other two I want to quickly touch on is some recent news that I heard. First is from ALS Pharmaceuticals. It's a small biotech firm in Boston. The founders, they did their graduate work at Brown. And so they just published some really great phase 2 results for their drug called AMX003. And we were able to fund that trial in collaboration with ALS Finding a Cure and the MDA, this is one of those examples of how we've been able to jointly fund projects with other organizations. And so what they showed in their recent report is a statistically significant slowing of ALS disease progression as measured by the ALS functional rating scale. So that's a typical primary measurement of ALS, of function of people with ALS compared to a placebo. So this is really exciting. So the folks at AMLAX are really looking at this data more closely, and we'll publish it in a journal shortly, and also at an upcoming conference. And so we'll hear soon what the next steps are of how they're going to pursue the next phase of the trial. So very exciting results that are really promising, and they're a great company, and I think they have a great product that we're really excited to be able to be a part of and fund. And the last one I think also doesn't get a lot of press, but I want to emphasize is it's called arimoclomol. This drug is in a phase 3 trial for ALS out of a Danish company actually called Orphazyme. And what arimoclomol does, it actually helps clear that toxic proteins from your cells. It helps get that bad protein out too, but in a different way than antisense. So it's kind of each drug has their own way, a mechanism to work, right? And so this is a little bit different, but also I think could be very effective. So they're in a phase 3 trial, and I think they're almost, if not fully enrolled. And so I'm hoping we'll hear results for them soon. And what they just showed, which I just read online the other day, is that they I'm looking at the press release right now, Mike, so I get this right, is
Excellent.
that they actually published a press release that showed that they're using R-monoclonal for another disease called Niemann-Pick disease type C.
Okay.
And they announced that this really showed, after a 12-month data extension trial, they showed a sustained effect in reducing disease progression over 2 years. So they found some really great results for another disease that gives me hope that our monoclonal, once we get the data for ALS, will also be positive. So very exciting for the company and for, I think, people with ALS and their families, that this could be a potential other oral drug that they could take hopefully in the near future. So something coming down this pipeline that I think to keep your eye out on.
Yeah, that's extremely exciting, like you said. And I think most of us that aren't as plugged into the world of ALS research, we don't necessarily come across that info, and you really only see the splashy stuff that ends up more in the mainstream media. So to have you talk about some of those other pieces that are coming through the pipeline, that's very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anytime. I think, there's a lot of different information out there, and I think one of the best places to get information about ALS research is through our blog, alsa.org/blog, and
Yep.
everything there has been fact-checked and is accurate, and we're very proud of our blog, and there's a lot of research content there. So if you have a question, I hope people will go to that blog and do a quick search and get accurate information on some of these research projects. And it has exciting news about some of these new trials and results that are coming out over time.
Thank you for mentioning that. I was going to ask you that question, actually, for anyone that has questions. The website is always a great resource, and we will link to that in the show notes as well if people want to visit the site to see the blog and get some of those questions answered and some of that information that's available. I also want to ask you, Doctor, somewhat related, what else people can do to get involved in ALS research. And I know advocacy is a big part of it, and ALS is a disease that can often leave families and individuals feeling helpless, like there's not a lot that they can do to stem the tide. And there's also so many questions and conversation around ongoing trials and research participation and how to access those things. What are some of the avenues that people can explore if they want to participate more deeply in ALS research?
Yeah, I think, when you first think about ALS research, how to participate, you always go right to clinical trials, but there's other creative ways to give information that's really critical. One of the ones that's always good to do is to sign up for the National ALS Registry, and that helps actually track how many people currently live with ALS and also track how many people are diagnosed each year. And so that's something that we've been supporting for very many years through our advocacy efforts that we're really proud of. And the goal of the National Registry is really to look at environmental risk factors for ALS in certain areas of the country. So, something in the ground or in the water or whatever, in the air, it could be anything, in the environment that is making me sick. So they'll be able to see that there's a group of people in this area, that doesn't seem right. And then we can then take that information, the researchers and the ALS community, and take that information from the registry and start delving into those areas and then potential risk factors that cause ALS.
Yep.
So that's something they could always do. It doesn't take a lot of time. And we have a really wonderful relationship with the CDC who runs this. And so I can't emphasize enough to sign up for that. And the other one I want to do a shameless plug for is a new program that we're about to launch by the end of the month, and that's called ALS Focus.
Okay.
And so ALS Focus is a survey platform. And to really start understanding the needs and preferences and experiences of people with ALS and their caregivers across the disease spectrum, understanding what are those burdens, what are those challenges. And so, there's a lot of burdens out there, and that some of them, we hear about all the time, that people have problems accessing home health or have financial difficulty because of ALS. And so what we want to do is, in a scientifically rigorous way, gather data, information, that data to show that there's actually a problem. We know there's a problem, but we need data. And so that data that we're going to collect will really inform decisions that are made by key opinion leaders like policymakers, the FDA, Congress, pharmaceutical companies, and even ALS Association leadership to inform our strategic plan, how we want to move forward as an organization. And those decisions can then inform programs or policies to help make a difference in people's lives. So looking at home health, insurance issues, financial burden, people need certain equipment. What matters most to you with ALS? Like if I were to get a drug to help me get better, like what would that be? Would it be like, playing a video game? I love video games versus like petting my dog or cat. What is most meaningful for people with ALS?
Yeah.
And so what we're going to do is start the survey on platform, and people with ALS, current and past caregivers, 18 and older, only in the United States, are able to apply. So there's very, very open eligibility requirements, unlike many clinical trials. And so 4 times a year, we'll put out a survey. And so once you sign up, you'll be able to, you put your demographic information in one time.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to update it later, you can. But it's really one time. And then you'll get pinged at 4 times a year about a survey.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm excited about it. And I think what's really exciting, and it sets us apart from other surveys that are going out, because I know when we were forming this program, we have a patient caregiver advisory committee who's been wonderful to work with.
Yeah.
And they kept saying, we get so inundated by surveys. Like, we want to do this in a thoughtful way that we don't have to continually get annoyed by, like, surveys. And so how can you do this and not to be annoying?
Yeah.
And so we took that in mind, and they also helped us figure out what are the best questions we can ask, what are the survey topics, what do they care most about, and we're able to make those decisions. And so what's very cool is that we'll be able to look at results by zip code to understand specific needs and burden in specific areas of our country, which is very cool.
Oh, yeah.
And then also participants will be able to actually check the results when the survey closes compared to others, which I always like to do personally when I take a survey. And then the most thing I'm excited about is that all the data that we collect will be open and free to the entire ALS community. Meaning that's free to pharmaceutical companies, it's free to researchers, it's free to our chapters, it's free to other ALS organizations or other organizations that are interested. This data is open and free. And so we're so proud of that. So what we're hoping is that we're going to build these really robust data sets that people can really delve into and really start doing some great research that help really solve some of these big challenges people with ALS have.
That's a great idea. ALS Focus and leaving it open like that, as you just mentioned, that data is so powerful. And I can envision these different organizations, these different groups really gleaning a lot from those data sets over time and being able to use them in creative ways that are really going to help us all.
Exactly. That's our goal. And we've been talking to other ALS organizations and other researchers, and we have some really great collaborators and really some great corporate sponsors that are helping move us forward, which has just been wonderful to work with. And especially our patient and caregivers on our committee have just been so much fun to work with. And so we'll launch, Mike, I'll send more information out on the national and the chapter level about this new program. We'll launch, I think, definitely by the end of January. And our first survey is around insurance and financial burden. And so we were asking questions about what types of insurance people with ALS have over the course of the disease and how does that change? What are the costs? Is the coverage they have adequate? What are the gaps? What are those experiences people are having? Not only the people with ALS, but their caregivers who do a lot of the paperwork too. What are those experiences and burdens they have in maintaining their coverage, and have they lost their coverage? So this is something that we thought was really important as a group that decided this, along with our patient caregiver committee and our steering committee, and looking forward to getting this first survey out, starting to get some really great data in the next month or so. So I'll definitely keep you posted, and thank you for letting me give this plug.
Oh, no, that's great news. And I know that our listeners will be excited to hear about it, and they'll keep their eyes open. And as Dr. Yersak mentioned, look for that at the end of January here. And we'll also include any information on our social media channels to make sure you have access to that. And that's going to be a nice step forward. And again, data is power. So we're all looking forward to that. Yeah.
And if our listeners have any other questions about anything I said today, I think one of the best places to get information is like our blog, like I said. They've published several articles around NurOwn and clinical trials, so just do a simple search on that. And then you can always email us at questions@alsa-national.org. We have a wonderful person who reads all your emails, everything gets read, and then she divvies those questions up to the most appropriate person to answer them. So please feel free to always email us there.
Yeah, we'll put that email address in the show notes as well so people can click on that and send any questions they have. Thank you again, Dr. Yersak, for your time today. As the Senior Director of Mission Strategy for the ALS Association, you have access to all this information, and being able to share it with us is a really big deal, and we appreciate it, and our listeners appreciate it as well.
Thank you, Mike, for having me. I always enjoy working with you and your chapter, and please reach out to us, the organization, with any type of questions, and hopefully we can do this again soon, Mike. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
That's going to be our only segment on this episode. We wanted to make sure we gave Dr. Yersak plenty of time to give us that deep behind-the-scenes look at ALS research, and I'd like to thank her one more time for joining the pod. This won't be the last time you hear from us in January, though. Keep your eyes and ears open for some bonus content dropping next week. And of course, the easiest way to be notified when we release something fresh into the feed is to follow us on Facebook or Twitter, or, as I mentioned at the top, subscribe at connectingals.org to get all the latest. Connecting ALS is produced by Garrett Tiedemann from the ALS Association's Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota chapter in St. Paul, Minnesota. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon.